important. It doesn't matter so much that you and I understand, it's that anybody who picks up that file can look at this, find the supporting documentation, find out where we agreed to line item changes, you put it with that invoice, and then your accompanying progress report where you can pick up any changes in agreement or scope that we've talked about. And that progress report comes with the invoice too, and Kelly's going to be talking about that in a little bit. So this is all to kind of help you have the kind of file that the auditor doesn't pull a thread, and because years later we don't remember the explanation and it's not in the file, you have to repay it, okay? Because if I can't find a way to explain it, you repay it, okay? Okay, so Kelly.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kelly List. I am an engineering geologist in Laura McLean's unit. And over the years, we have received a wide variety of different looking types of progress reports. We have a template that is online, and I believe it's also included in the project director guide. True? And but not everybody does it the same, so we're just going to kind of go through, building off of what Laura was just talking about with an auditable file, just to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page. In general, the progress report should have these types of categories that we have listed on the slide. Any kind of lack of detail in your project report will delay the paying of your invoice and your reimbursement. So the more detail that you provide us will be easier also for the auditing purposes later. It could be up to 35 years later that they can come and audit us for your grant after it's been closed. So, so you'd have to just keep in mind who's going to be around to answer these auditors' questions, because it probably will not be you. And also something that we were told is that a lot of these progress reports have not been signed in the past, and it has to be signed by the project director or somebody else that's listed on the project director certification form. So in general, the introduction of your progress report, you really need to write it as if the person reading it has no background knowledge of your project. Your auditor is not going to know, is not going to do the review of your application. It's not going to go through this whole process that we are with you. So don't write it as if you're talking to your grant manager. Write it as if you're talking to somebody who does not know your project. Don't just copy and paste your scope of work that we're going to put into your grant agreement, but summarize it, but make sure it's concise enough that we can all understand what your project entails. And this part of your report probably will not change on the quarterly basis unless we amend your grant agreement, and then your scope of work changes in your grant agreement. Then it will change also on this project, the progress report. This is going to be the bulk of your report, the summary of activities. This is where you get to describe to us what you did for this billing period and also justify your cost that you're submitting with your invoices. The grant manager should be able to read this part of your progress report, review your invoice, and be comfortable enough approving and submitting your invoice for processing. And please do not leave any questions unanswered. If you read through it and you possibly think that there would be something else somebody might need more information on, please include it. The more that you provide, like I said, the easier it's going to be and the quicker your process will be. And also, something that Danielle's going to talk about is the final report and the annual report I will be talking about later. These progress reports is going to be your foundation to those other two reports. So even though you're thinking, oh, well, we just were awarded the grant, why would I even care about the final report or your annual report? If you start thinking now about how you're going to complete this process from the beginning to the end, it will really make the reporting easier for you in the long run. So this is where you get to talk about your deliverables that are in your grant agreement and the process and progress of those of the deliverables. In the past, they have all been lumped into one section in the previous progress reports. We've broken them out now into two separate sections to make it easier for the grant manager to know, one, what's there for them to review for this billing period and what's still in progress. And this is an example, actually this is just a snapshot of the example that we're going to put online. So the summary of items for review is literally just your invoicing, which goes under your project administration cost. Your monitoring report, if you're doing monitoring and you're doing it on a quarterly basis, you will probably be submitting that on a quarterly basis with your progress report, so you would be putting that under your items for review. And then in your items that are in progress, those are the items that you've started working on but haven't completed. So if you haven't started any work on them, do not start summarizing anything here. And again, we completed an example, and that is going to be on the web sometime in the next week, we hope. So I think we're going to get these slides and some other things that are available to you, so that will go up at the same time. So this part, the additional information, this is rarely used. And what you would put in this particular section would be something that you had to complete, either some kind of engineering review, something that pertains to your project, but you're not, one, asking for reimbursement on it, and you're not reporting it as match. So if you're not going to include it in any of those two, you're not going to have it on your deliverable table. So you would be putting it in this section, mainly if the grant manager needs to know this information as a vital part of understanding the project as a whole. And I know this is a planning and monitoring, so we're probably not going to have a whole lot of pictures because you're not going to do any kind of construction. So that doesn't mean that you shouldn't think about things that you can put into this section of the report. This is your opportunity to give us like a snapshot view of what you've been doing with the bond funds. So some ideas that we put up there, if you're doing any kind of education or outreach, provide us with a copy of the mailer or a brochure. Summarize your monitoring, give us some conceptual models. Just start thinking about ways that you can show us that you are making progress with this project. And as I mentioned, when we get this up on the internet, this will be the website that you'll be able to get that information. Is there any questions? Questions overall?
Any questions on the web? No. Okay. Yeah, they're still conscious, but barely. So now we're going to head into the deliverables section and just briefly go over these. We're getting a little ahead of you here probably, but we need you to have, for instance, information in particular on CEQA and performance measures. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Ms. Sarah Gatsky, who's going to talk to you a little bit about CEQA documentation.
Okay, as Laura said, I'm Sarah Gatsky, and I am going to spend a very short amount of time hopefully talking to you about CEQA, just to give you an outline of what we expect from you. And then I'll put up at the end some resources so that if you have more detailed questions about CEQA, you can go there and hopefully find your answer, and also talk to your grant manager if you need some assistance. Okay, so CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act, and we are all very lucky because as State Board grantees, we all get to do the CEQA process. So, so if you thought you weren't going to do it, you actually get to do it. Okay, so who is going to prepare the CEQA documents? In most cases, the grantee is going to act as the lead agency and will prepare and file the CEQA documents. If the grantee is not a public agency, then it will be the state board's responsibility to act as the lead agency and file those CEQA documents. I went through all of our applications and noted which types of CEQA documents that would be needed, and it turns out that most people are going to be filing notice of exemptions, and there are just a very few who will have to do a negative declaration or perhaps a mitigated negative declaration. So I'm just going to go quickly over those two processes, and like I said, I'm going to give you some resources at the end so that if you have more detailed questions, you can get them answered there. Okay, so the NOE, or Notice of Exemption process. So the first step is for the lead agency to find the Notice of Exemption form, fill it out, and then file it with the county clerk and the Office of Planning and Research, or OPR. Once you've filed with OPR, you can then fill out the State Board Notice of Exemption concurrence form, which I have a picture of up here, and of course, again, your grant manager will go ahead and get that form to you if you need it. So you'll fill out the form. The top of it is just putting in your project information, and then there's a section to indicate which exemption you qualify for. A lot of these planning and monitoring projects will be exempt under Section 15306, Class 6 information collection, and that covers basic data collection and research with no disturbance to an environmental resource. So once you've filled out this form and you sign it, you're going to send it to your grant manager. They're going to review the form along with any permits you have for your project and a written project description, which you will provide to your grant manager, and then they will sign off and concur on the form and send it to the division's deputy director for their signature as well. So that's the NOE process. If your project requires a negative declaration or a mitigated negative declaration, you're going to have a slightly longer CEQA process. And so I'm just going to give you again a quick overview of that. So first of all, the lead agency will prepare initial study, either the negative declaration or the mitigated negative declaration. And then the lead agency will give the public notice that that document is available. And after the public review period, the lead agency will incorporate any comments from that review and then have their appropriate decision-making body consider and adopt that negative declaration or mitigated negative declaration. After that's complete, the lead agency will file a notice of determination with the county clerk and OPR. And once OPR has that on file, the state board can prepare their CEQA administrative staff report, and that will show that you have approval from the state board, and that will also be signed by our deputy director. And so here's just a page with a little summary of what all the different environmental documents that we'll need in order to approve your CEQA clearance. So all projects will need to provide us with a project description, and that's going to be about a page in length, and we would like it to be written so that the general public can understand what your project is and the methods you're using. You will also need to supply us with all the permits that are required for your project. And then, again, that final environmental document, whether it's an NOE, a mitigated negative declaration, or a negative declaration. So that will be the same for all projects. We'll need to get us that information. And if you're an NOE, you'll additionally need to get us the concurrence form, which we talked about. For negative declarations and mitigated negative declarations, we'll need the notice of determination. And if you're a mitigated negative declaration, you'll need to provide a mitigation monitoring and reporting plan. And as promised, here is the slide with some additional resources for you to use. Hopefully you'll find them helpful. As a final reminder, I want to stress that any state-funded activities that are subject to CEQA cannot begin until you have the state board's CEQA clearance. So if you have any other questions, contact your grant manager. They'll be a helpful resource for you. And I will now leave it to Leslie for performance measures.
The question?
Sorry, I have just two quickies. Do you need to do a public notice for an NOE as well? And do you need to mention permits that aren't about construction? So like if the project is actually working with, say, MPDS permits, is that the kind of information you want, or just permits for actually installing some kind of equipment?
I'll go ahead and take the question. So it would be a permit that's required for your project. So if your project is going to require an NPDES permit because you're discharging, yes, we would want to know about that because that is specifically required for your project. If it's kind of associated that, you know, you're looking at this discharge, but you don't have to go get a permit, get an NPDES permit in order to implement your project, if that's all right. And as far as the NOE public notice requirements, I don't believe there are any. I'll have to, you just file it with the office of, well, the county clerk and with OPR, and then, because it's exempt. Pat?
Leslie, did you not previously indicate that the purpose of filing it was just to start a clock so if somebody did have an issue with the notice of exemption, they would have 30 days?
Right, that's one of the purposes, is to notify people that you're implementing this project. You've made a determination that it is exempt from CEQA, and that's the same purpose that the State Water Board will make our findings, that our funding of this project also is exempt from CEQA. So that is one of the purposes of doing it, is doing the exemption. It does start that clock as far as the litigation is concerned. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to really quickly talk to you about project effectiveness, the effectiveness of the project that we're funding and that you're implementing, how you're going to measure and report that project effectiveness, and why that's so important, why it's important to us, why it should be important to you. So we're going to talk about that basically under this category of performance measures for your project. And I'm going to talk about these three topics. The first is the project assessment and evaluation plan, which you'll all be required to do as part of your project. And then if you're doing monitoring, you'll also have a monitoring plan and a quality assurance project plan. So I want to talk about what a project assessment and evaluation plan is. It's what us, the State Water Board, call the plans that the grantees develop that basically tell us how effective your project's going to be. It's the way to plan out how you're going to do that and document the effectiveness. It's going to tell us what those goals, what's the goal of your project, and then really as you implement your project, what's your roadmap and those milestones going along throughout the project to make sure that at the end those goals are met. And the PAEP, as we call it, the PEEP, it's going to summarize that information and have it right there where you and the grant manager and the public know where to find it and can kind of monitor as we go along through the project and make sure that we're staying on track and that we're going to get the benefits that the state is anticipating by funding this project. So what is a PEEP? As I've kind of mentioned before, it's going to identify those specific performance measures for your project. And again, it's the tool that you can use as you're implementing your project to make sure that we're staying on track and that if any little adjustments or some sort of adaptive management has to occur, if we're kind of getting off track, that at the end, we don't want to do that at the end where we get to the end of the project and haven't maybe been able to make those adjustments and not able to make sure that that project is as effective as we all want it to be. And so that is really, you know, another accountability tool that we have to make sure that we're maximizing the use of the funds for these projects. Because you were all awarded projects competitively against other projects, and so we want to make sure that we get those benefits that we anticipate. The PEEP has many purposes. It a lot of times can answer a lot of the questions that we're looking at as, you know, we're looking to make sure that the goal of your project meets what was intended by the bond law. The legislature put findings when they put these bonds on the ballot, and they had intent for these funds. And also our program, our specific program legislation had specific intent for these funds. So this is a way to make sure that what we're doing, we're not getting off track of what the intent of the funds were. We can also look at it's really, as you go through, as we'll see and develop your PAEP, it kind of walks you through the thought process to make sure that those goals of your project are realistic, and that when we get to the end of the project, we're actually going to be able to achieve those goals. So it's a good tool just kind of to check you and make sure you're not really having too lofty goals on the project. You know, some of the questions that we'll look at are about water quality improvements, obviously, and ecosystem improvements that we're looking for and how we measure those. You know, what's the assessment of the watershed potentially could be a purpose of the PAEP, or what stressors are we looking at. These are the sorts of things that we think about as we're looking at project effectiveness and developing the PAEP. Another really important part is that it's a communication tool to the taxpayers that are supporting the project. SB 1070 created the Water Quality Monitoring Council and also had requirements in there for state agencies like the Water Board that administer these grants to make sure that we're making the public aware of what the effectiveness and the benefits of these projects that we're funding are, and also to ensure that any of that data, the monitoring data, is available to the public. And so I just spent the morning at a meeting of the Monitoring Council where the idea of grant data and the effectiveness and availability of it was discussed, and how to improve that and improve that coordination to make sure that all this information that people are generating through these state-funded projects is available to the public. So there's a lot of interest in there. We get a lot of requests from the legislature for what's going on with the bond dollars, what's been spent in my district, and things like this. And so this is a good way for us to make sure that we are being accountable that way. And finally, it is legislatively required by the statute of Prop 84 for the stormwater program. It specifically says that grant recipients shall report on project effectiveness, and these are the three areas mentioned in the statute. There obviously can be others too. So the State Water Board a few years back, because we had a lot of different grant programs and there were a lot of people doing different things with project effectiveness, developed some guidance on how to write your PAEP. And we did this in conjunction with San Francisco Estuary Institute, helped us. And we looked at the different types of projects that the State Water Board funds and came up with guidance for how to put together your PAEP. And we identified 6 different types of project categories that we tend to fund. And so I've listed them here. You may not have all of these categories in your project because these are planning and monitoring projects, but the categories that we divided our projects and that we like you to identify your performance measures are, the first is planning, research, and assessment. So that sounds like that should be a good one for all of you. Education, outreach, and capacity building. There's a very good chance that your projects are also going to have activities in those categories. We also have habitat restoration, pollutant load reduction, water conservation, reliability, recycling, flood attenuation, and floodplain protection. So those are the broad categories of activities that we fund projects in. But this table that identifies your performance measures is really the heart and soul of the PAEP. And so this kind of summarizes it all. We've got guidance on our website, again, that runs you through all the different parts of the PAEP. But this is really where it walks you through the critical components. And I'm going to have to put my glasses on to read it. So and you probably can't read it either. But the first thing is to identify those project goals. And you have all done this in your proposal. You know what it is that you want to achieve with your project. What is the overall what, when, who, how, why, you know, what's that big lofty goal that you're going to do? And then the next thing is what are the desired outcomes of your project? It's related to that goal. You hopefully have some specific actual change, environmental or behavioral. What is it that is going to be the outcome of the project? You're going to have output activities that lead to that outcome. And these are sort of the things that you do, the numbers of activities, the numbers of workshops, the numbers of things that you produce that are the beans that you count, but they're important in leading up to the end result, which is the outcome that you want affected by implementing your project. You're going to have outcome indicators that list how are you going to measure those outcomes. And this is really difficult. This is probably the hardest part, is really being able to identify. We're pretty good at doing outputs because we all can count those beans, and that's pretty easy. And especially within the time frame of these grants, it's very difficult to come up with, you know, those outcome indicators. But you'd hope that maybe you're going to get a certain level of response to a survey or a certain implementation of something that's going to lead, we hope, to improved water quality, to improved stormwater quality specifically for this, or a decrease in pollutants in this grant. And then you're going to identify exactly how you're going to measure that. So you're going to identify what are the tools that you're going to use. How are you going to count this? How are you going to measure it? Are you going to do water quality monitoring to show trends and changes in water quality? And if you are, what are the methods that you're going to use and things like that? Are you going to do surveys of people? Things like that. Are you going to do different types of assessment to show those changes? Oops. I'm talking too much, I guess.
Should be plugged in. It's got a power source.
Well, while they do that, I'll keep, you guys have the handout so we can keep talking. And then what we want to really do, and this is another really hard thing, is to actually put quantifiable targets on there so that we can actually, as we make these measurements, that we're going to have, you know, X% of something, or we're going to reduce the sediment load by this much at the end of this project. So these, I mean, it helps you as you're thinking through your project and what all these activities that we're funding, what is the real purpose of doing that, and what is it going to lead to? And that's going to help us to know that this money is being well spent, and at the end of the project we're going to have something that really is going to help improve stormwater quality. Yep.
So we'll be back in a minute. We've got it plugged into a power strip.
Oh. I'm going to keep going because you guys can look at your handouts while they mess with this. So I mentioned that in some cases, in some of your projects, you're going to actually do water quality monitoring or environmental monitoring, and that's probably most of these projects, these planning and assessment projects. So if you're going to do water quality monitoring, you're going to have a monitoring plan. Okay, I'm back. And so there's often a lot of confusion between your PAEP, your monitoring plan, and your QAPP. So sometimes they're all one document, sometimes they're two documents, sometimes they're three. We can accept them anyway, as long as you make sure to explain to us that how they interrelate. But your monitoring plan is going to lay out the question that the monitoring is supposed to answer, what it is that this monitoring is for, and identify your locations, frequencies, you know, the media, constituents, things like that, what your field sampling protocols are, who's responsible for doing what. That type of detail is in your monitoring plan. Then your quality assurance project plan is to ensure that that data that you collect is going to be adequate to answer those questions and to meet the needs of your project. So it may be included in the monitoring plan. It may be a standalone one. You may use QAPP that the State Water Board has developed for our surface water ambient monitoring program. They have a QAP that is available and can be used for that as long as it is appropriate for your project. And that the QAPP is where you get into, you know, the data quality indicators, your precision and accuracy, your standard operating procedures, SOPs, quality control, things like that, how you're going to validate your data to ensure that it was collected appropriately and at the appropriate quality, and how your data will be reported. And for Prop 84, any water quality data has to be uploaded to CEDN, which is our statewide database, our California Environmental Data Exchange Network, and that is a statewide database. Right now, all of the swamp data is going into CEDN. We have 4 regional monitoring centers that house the CEDN data and actually are available to help grantees in formatting the data and getting the data uploaded. But that's something to keep in mind as you're developing your monitoring plan in QAPP, that that data does have to go into CEDN. That's a requirement of Prop 84. And as I mentioned, we just covered in whatever 5 minutes things that I think we've had separate 3-day training programs on. So I know there's a lot of information. We do have the performance measures, our PAEP training, and we have done workshops in the past, whole-day workshops with that. So there is information there, and we will have some examples of PAEP tables from some monitoring and assessment projects to help you out, and your grant manager has seen many PEEP tables if you're having trouble with it. And then there are lots of resources on monitoring plans and QAPPs on the SWAMP website. So that's there. There's actually sort of a template for a QAPP that you can get online and fill it out, and it'll actually fill out your QAPP for you. So that is my little spiel on performance measures, and if you have any questions about it, I'd be happy to answer them. You guys are looking dazed. Information overload. Mm-hmm.
We all submitted at PAEP in our grant applications.
Uh-huh.
Do those stand, or if there's a problem that our grant manager has with them, we'll be notified, I assume?
Yes, you will be notified. So I wasn't sure with this grant program whether you put the table in your PAEP. Yes, it will be. We'll be submitting. That forms the basis. There's some other information that will go in your PAEP, and your grant manager. It's probably a good thing to talk about right away with your grant manager on any changes before you even submit it. It's one of the first things you submit as a deliverable in your grant, and so yeah, I would have that conversation right away with your grant manager.
And I just want to add, most of the time when we need to work on something with that PAEP, it would be if you have a goal that it doesn't look like you're going to achieve within the terms of this grant, we're going to have you kind of reel it back in and go, okay, what can you get done before we close out the grant? And B, if you didn't provide any numeric goal. In that targets, that is our bean counter thing. We want numbers of meetings, numbers of samples collected, whatever is relevant for your goals. So that's what we usually end up working on with folks. Sometimes they get it right away and there's a numeric target in there. We're like, yep, that's a good one. This is something we'd like to report to the legislators. If it's not, then we'll probably let you know. We'll start working on it.
Okay, so to try and make this a little bit quicker than what we've been doing, the annual report and the PAEP status update has now been combined into a new and improved template. They used to be separate reports on an annual basis, but now we're going to combine them into one for you to make it easier for you and easier for us, and to make sure nothing is being forgotten on this. And as I mentioned previously, the progress reports is going to be your basis for your annual reports. So this is your opportunity to summarize all the great things you've been doing throughout the year and provide some pictures, make it look really nice, because some of these, I'm not sure, are these going to go on the web? Yeah, these will be going in fast, so available to the public. So make it nice, make it pretty. It's your time to, you know, sell your project and say, look what all the good that we did with this money. So, so in general, the annual report and PAEP status update will have these 4 main sections. And in the background section, and also the next one, which is the the project description. These, again, like in the progress report, probably will not change unless we amend your grant agreement. So just try and provide as much information as you can. These are going to be standalone projects. Do not refer to your project reports from the year. Don't refer to the previous annual reports that you've done or your grant agreement. Just make it a standalone report so that we don't have to keep fishing around for other things. More than likely, we don't have those other reports in our cubicle when we're reading this one. So make it easier for us too. And this is a snapshot of the new template that's going to be online with everything else here soon. And we just provided a box for you to put a picture in and a little description area to kind of go through that. This is the type of information that we would like to see in the project description. If, like we mentioned in the progress report, if you are not doing any kind of constructions, try and be creative on how to show us a picture of what your project is. We can also work with you on that too as the grant managers. And again, this is what it will look like in the overall report. And the project status, this is where you're going to take your quarterly progress reports and summarize the year-long of activities in this section of the report. This is what's going to change on an annual basis. This is going to be the bulk of your report, hopefully, and something that we're going to try and use for you to use and for your final report, which Danielle will be talking about shortly. We may not have the right questions up there for your specific project, so these are just a guide for you. This is not an end-all list, so if you think that there's some information that we're not asking you, please provide it to us, because we're not going to hold you to just what we have on here on this slide. And again, this is what the template looks like. So the PAEP status update, a lot of times our grantees think that if there is no change to their PAEP, they do not have to provide us with an annual update. But it's required. It's in your grant agreements and your deliverable table. So it's important. We can't process your invoices, and it's also a date in your deliverable table. So it really needs to be provided to us on an annual basis. And then one of the reasons why we also included it into this report. If you notice on the PAEP, when you're reviewing it, that you are consistently not meeting your targets or your goals, this would be a really good time to have that discussion with your grant manager to see if you need to revise those targets and goals in your PAEP. And the one thing that you don't want to do is get to the end of your project and you're writing your final report and you've met none of your goals. And now what are we going to do? Well, your final report is going to be very difficult to write. So that's why we're kind of discussing this now, because the more you think about it, the easier it will be when it comes to the end of this grant project for you. So I know that was fast, but I was told to make it quick. So if you have any questions? No? Danielle.
Hi. Okay, I'm going to talk about the final project report. So this is probably way down the road for you guys, but it's something to think about now. And it's your chance to really sell us on your project and achievements. So what is the goal of the final report? One goal is to capture your project importance. Is it a springboard for other studies? Does it provide a basis for implementation or construction projects? Another goal is to highlight specific achievements. So did your project have great water quality benefits? Were you ahead of schedule? Did you have cost savings? Did it facilitate stakeholder collaboration? Identify lessons learned, what things went wrong, and how were they resolved. And finally, this should be a standalone document so that anyone can pick it up and get a sense of what the project was about and how state funding was used. So the key pieces to your final project report, a good title page, and it should ideally include some of the items listed here. Also include a clear, concise table of contents showing the critical pieces of your report. You may want to include an executive summary or an introduction to begin your report. You'll definitely want to include your problem statement and relevant issues. So what is the problem your project aimed to address and the related issues? Is there data lacking on pollutants in your watershed, or is the project helping address a TMDL in a high priority watershed? What are your project goals? There should also be objectives tied to these goals as steps to help you achieve the goals, but these are, likely outlined in your PAEP. Okay, project description should include the following. The project type, so provide the funding program and focus of the funds. So for example, just stormwater planning and monitoring project. Project details, outline your scope of work or just describe your project. Include maps and figures to illustrate the project location and the benefit area. What were your project costs? And you'll want to talk about total, grant funded, and match costs. Project methodology. So what methods did you use to complete the project, such as data characterization, or ecosystem assessment, or information management? And a great thing to include is always pre-project photos or data and post-project photos or data. This kind of tangibly shows the benefit your project had. If your project has a lot of data, provide an analysis of the data. And finally, discuss the results and outcomes of your project. So here's where you also get to discuss your final PAEP, where your goals and targets met, and if not, why. Discuss your overall project effectiveness. Did the final budget deviate from the original budget? Were all deliverables submitted? Was the project completed on schedule? And what lessons were learned? Public outreach, you'll want to include a discussion about your public education and outreach components. So things you want to think about are, did you have public tours or meetings to help showcase the project? Did you distribute brochures or fact sheets? Or did you have good signage showcasing the project? And explain any conclusions about your project and next steps. So these next steps are really important if your targets were not met, and you'll need to explain what will happen in order to meet those targets and goals. Also outline how your project sets up the next steps for implementation projects. And finally, be sure to include appendices for any additional information such as photos or meeting minutes, your PAEP table, water quality data, or examples of your public outreach literature. And just a few additional notes about the final project report. So the draft is typically submitted about 2 to 3 months prior to the work completion date, which is outlined on the front of your grant agreement. And this allows time for the grant manager to review and provide comments if needed before the final version is submitted. And the final report must be submitted before the work completion date. So that's a reminder for that date on the front of your grant agreement that all work, including reporting, must be done by that date. And finally, we expect to upload these reports to our FAST system so they're accessible to the public. And keep in mind, we actually get inquiries sometimes from public officials and other public members about projects, and we often refer them to these final reports. So think about that when you're preparing it as well. And that's it.
We're also linking these reports on the various portals for the My Water Quality page that is with the Monitoring Council. So they actually will pull up a map, and there'll be a little dot with your project on it, depending on which portal the project link goes to. And somebody can click on that dot. It will pull up generally the summary, you know, kind of the executive summary, the project summary form that shows the pictures, and then there's another link that will link to the full report. So there's a lot of interest in this type of thing, and so it's not just going to go on a shelf somewhere. People are really using this, so make sure we have good reports to showcase the good work.
Okay, we're in the home stretch here, I promise, and then you guys can get up and we can get to meet you a little bit. But we have one last message we want to get to you, and I want to thank Kim Sellards with the Office of Enforcement for coming to speak with us. She's going to talk a little bit about fraud, waste, and abuse, and that's a really hot topic for us anytime, but especially now. So, Kim, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about this.
Good afternoon. I'm Kim Sellards. I work for the Office of Enforcement here at the State Water Board. About 2.5 years ago, the State Water Board decided to start an initiative, a pilot project, where we would look in and root out fraud that was occurring in the invoices that's submitted to the State Water Board. This is associated with the Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Fund, as well as loans and grants programs. Today I'm going to talk to you briefly, I think I have about 10 minutes, about what is fraud, how much fraud is out there, and what you can look for to see if fraud's going on with your project. So fraud is defined as a misrepresentation or concealment of the truth. So it's either a lie or you're hiding something, it's an omission. This is a press release issued by the Office of Inspector General, and it says, there's a quote here from a federal attorney, and he says, "We've come to realize that 10 to 15% of the federal funds expended are lost due to fraud, waste, and or abuse." So that's not an anomaly with federal money. That's not an anomaly with just state money. This is an industry standard. So what do you look for when you find fraud? Well, first of all, I should let you know that as the grantee, you're not just a pass-through for this money and these bills, that along with that comes the responsibility and the liability for these. California Penal Code 115A says that if you submit false documents to the state, you are liable for a felony. You have committed a felony. You're guilty of a felony is actually what it says. So with that in mind, I think it's important that as you see these invoices that come through that you take notice. And it's not just the invoices where you can see fraud, but it's actually also the data. So here's an example of a lab report, and you'll see that these words that are misspelled, there are 10 of them. They're all misspelled. All these words are misspelled. So this is a template, right? They've been using this for a long period of time, supposedly. So something's wrong here. Obviously, this is not their template. They probably were worked out these misspellings over time. They're in the lab business, and lab is misspelled as LAD 2 or 3 times throughout this. Here's an example of an invoice that came into the State Water Board, and I changed the number slightly, but you can tell that it's missing a lot of detail, right? There's some groundwater sampling that was done, and the price is $10,000. We have no idea who performed the work. We have no idea when the work was performed. We're missing a lot of information, so we don't want to see things like this. Or I'm guessing you guys don't want to see things like this. Here's an example of an altered document. So this document came into the State Water Board, and if you look at the top left-hand side, you'll see the company name, and you'll see the address. But what's missing is the phone number. There's no phone number to contact these people. I don't know if you guys have ever gotten a bill before from the credit card company. Whenever they send you a bill, they always have a contact number, right? If you're not going to pay that bill, or you want to dispute that bill, or you're going to pay it late, they want you to get in touch with them and let them know. So here we have an invoice, and they're not even giving their client the phone number to call them and contact them. So that's a little bit odd. And then if you look at the very bottom center, there's a description of what's being purchased here, and it's a treatment system for about $50,000. Well, there's no serial number. I just bought a calculator for $10 for my desk, and it has a serial number on it. Wouldn't a $50,000 treatment system have a serial number? Yes, it would. And that's also how the manufacturer is going to track warranty information, right? Just like in your car, your vehicle, anything else. So we called the company, and we said we'd like to get a copy of the invoice, and this is what they sent us. And you'll notice there's a few differences, right? You'll see that there's a phone number, there's a fax number, and there's also a serial number on this invoice. And if you're looking hard, you'll realize that the treatment system was about $50,000, but now it's about $15,000 cheaper, right? Here's an example of another invoice that came to the State Water Board. You can see that it's field technician, worked for 13 hours in February 2011. You're required to write the staff's name who performed the work. You know, we also need to know what date the work was performed. If or when it's audited, we need to be able to verify that the timesheet matches up with what was invoiced. What about costs that seem excessive? This was for one soil drum that was disposed. And if you look about the next to last line will show you that the disposal facility charged $86. But it took 3 people and all kinds of special equipment to get that one drum there, and now the cost is over $1,000. What about equipment? It's really important that you're aware of what equipment is out on the site. If they've purchased equipment, a $50,000 treatment system, something like that, that what is billed to the State Water Board is what is on site. One way that you can usually tell is a lot of times the serial numbers will be on the outside of the equipment. So this is a blown up here of the serial number that you can find. Not always can you find the serial number on the outside of the equipment, but you can quite frequently. So I'm going to tell you a little story about a piece of equipment. I went out to the field and I saw that they had a compressor on site, and they had charged us, the State Water Board, for the compressor. They had charged for a Gardner Denver compressor. When I was out at the site, they had a Curtis Thompson compressor, right? Doesn't seem like a big deal. And I went back and I traced how much they had paid for the Curtis Thompson compressor, and it was 40% less than what they had billed us for. So something seemingly simple like that, I don't know whether it had different specifications or whether it was a cheaper piece of equipment, but it can still have big ramifications if the piece of equipment that you're charging for is not what's on site. So it's really important to know that. So what my unit does is once we get a complaint, we will start an investigation. There are different ways that things can be handled. They can be handled administratively. Laura talked about an instance with the per diem where the person was the grantee was going to have to pay that money back. That's administrative when they ask for the money back. We can also send things to the Attorney General's office, and they can pursue them either criminally or civilly. This is a case that we have going on now. We have a couple cases active and press releases on the website, but I just chose one for you today. And this was, these individuals have a consulting company, and they do cleanups at gas stations, and they can bill the cleanup fund for reimbursement up to $1.5 million per site. And we did an investigation. We referred it to the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office decided to pursue it criminally and civilly. They started off criminally. So these people were subjected to a search warrant at their multi-million-dollar home in Santa Barbara. Also, a search warrant was performed at their Mammoth Lakes house, in the ski area. And lots of their documents were seized and are still being held right now, I think. They also spent about 5 days in jail. The case is still ongoing, but some of the allegations include, padding their labor hours, charging for work that for doing work in Santa Barbara when they were known to be in Costa Rica. So if you have some issues and you think that they may be fraud or you want to report fraud, this is, it's all in your handout, but here's my email address. This is actually reportfraud@waterboards.ca.gov. You can send it there. That's a website that our unit watches. Also, there's a message line. It's not an actual where you call in and talk to somebody. You can leave a message. We'll call you back. If you want to call and leave an anonymous tip, that's fine too. You don't have to give your name. And if you ever have questions, you can call me directly. If you're unsure whether what you're seeing is fraud or not and you want to know what to look for, go ahead and feel free to give me a call. Are there any questions? Okay.
All right, thank you very much, Kim. I think that was, I was really appreciative of your presentation, and there was lots of good information in there. And just in case you guys are unsure, I have found fraud in grants before, so it does happen, unfortunately, and it is why that paper trail is so very important to both us and you guys. Thank you so much for coming. I really, really appreciate it. I'm hoping that by doing this meeting now and kind of walking you guys through the process, it's going to go a lot smoother as we start down this road, and we've answered some of your questions. We've probably given you more reason for questions, but at least you'll know where we're going. I hope you have a roadmap. I hope you understand why we're asking for the things that we're asking for and what we're using them for, not just random paper that we stack up in our office and make paper planes with, or whatever it is we might be doing. This is the first time we've done this, in part because we can't go meet with all of you to give you this information separately, and we wanted to get it to you in the best way possible. So we would really love your input. I know we're long. That would be the first thing. We're long. We'll tighten it up. But any input you can give us, we would really appreciate, so that we can make it the best presentation possible and give you the information you need right off the get-go. So with that, I think we'll end it. Anything else? Okay. Free at last, and we'll be sticking around here to talk to you guys. Do we have any questions on the? Okay. They're definitely asleep. Okay, thank you guys very much.